Cybersecurity concerns are ever evolving. OT cybersecurity is even more complex, and it's so much more than just software and hardware. How do you stay on top of it all? Aaron Crow has over 25 years experience with cybersecurity. 15 of those years focused on operational technology across multiple industries, and he wants to help you. Welcome to the Protect OT Cybersecurity Podcast, brought to you by Industrial Defender. Now here's your host, Aaron Crow.
Hey, y'all, welcome to the podcast. Today I've got Fred. Fred, why don't you introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about you and who you are, what you do, all the fun stuff.
Glad to, and thank you, Aaron, for this opportunity to come on. Really like your show. Real quick history of who Fred is and how I got here. I began my early career as an IT guy, and up until about 2000, that's what I did. And to be honest, I got a little bored. But I mean, I love IT. Like I say, that's how I got my career started. But I threw my resume out there, and this little company called Facility Robotics, they're not in business anymore, called me up and said, we saw your resume and want to talk to you. And in my head, Facility Robotics, I'm seeing these little robots running around and all this stuff. And so I was like, sure. So I went there more or less figuring they're probably not going to pick me, but hey, this sounds interesting. So they went through and explained what the job was and what all we would be doing. And I'm just kind of a straight up guy. I said, well, I don't think you've got the right guy, because all I do is work with networks and stuff. And they said, well, absolutely. That's because these systems are being connected to networks and then ultimately to the internet. And so I'm like, okay, but I don't understand all these mechanical systems and everything that you're talking about. I'm a mechanical guy, but I've not been in this industry. And they said, well, our industry's changing. And so we've got this large customer. It's a department store chain, and we got to connect up all of these systems all over the country. And so I said, well, if you'll teach me how to do that, I'll help on this end. So that's when I got into the business, and that was 23 years ago. And two things happened to me. The first 6 months of my life, head back home, I tell my wife they're going to fire me because I do not know what I'm doing. And so she's like, they hired you for a reason. The other thing was culture shock, because I came into a world that was literally the Wild West. Yeah. I mean, it's, I would say we were probably a little more structured just because of the customer we were dealing with. And then ultimately we started dealing with data centers. However, there were no change control. There was no asset management. There was nothing. I mean, it's whatever. If somebody would say, look, we just want to control this HVAC system. Mm-hmm. Would you put in System X? Sure. And that was all the instruction we got. But anyway, so that's how I got into this career. Yeah. And then how I drank the Kool-Aid. And I like to tell people all the time, I'm the reason there's a problem.
Right.
Here I am, preaching the cybersecurity message, but the thing is, I have to be real and say, look, this started with us, the integrators, the service providers, because the building guys, if you look back historically, these guys started off with mechanical systems, computers were added, service providers like ourselves are really the knowledge keepers of the control side, mm-hmm. not the building guys. But to fast forward how I got into cybersecurity, that I went to work for a larger company in the Atlanta area, a mechanical company, and we had like 1,100 employees. And if you looked at the Atlanta skyline, you could pretty much every building in Atlanta we touched. Mm-hmm. But we had thousands of systems. And we started working with a large multimedia group who you probably know. But before we started, before the programmers, before my team got involved, the head of facilities for this organization worldwide called me into his office and he said, Fred, I have 84 networks that run into my buildings. If you or your guys take any one of those networks offline, he told me how much a minute these things make.
Yeah.
He said, if you take any of these offline, I'm going to have you all arrested, and then we'll figure out if it was a terroristic attack. Light bulb went off. It's like, I know how open these systems are.
Yeah.
And here I am working with this company that affects most people's lives every day. And they've got big holes.
Yeah.
So that's how I got here.
Yeah, it's so funny because before the podcast started recording, I talked about how my background is critical infrastructure and power generation, but I also have an IT background as well, right? So I started in IT and kind of transition again because there wasn't anything called OT. Like that thing didn't exist. You just did technology, and it didn't matter the vertical. Was I doing it over here or over there? But I love the point you brought up. Like the reason that we are dealing with cybersecurity and OT is because things have changed, right? We started putting networks together because you can do things more efficiently, and I can get more data, and instead of an analog system, now it's a digital system because I can control it remotely. It's the same reason we've done the same thing in our homes, right? Many of us have done automation and turned on, smart light switches and Alexa, and I want to be able to turn my lights on and off and adjust my thermostat without getting off the couch, or turn it on before, when I'm on vacation. When I land, I want to turn it on, so by the time I get home, it's already started cooling off. And all of those little conveniences are why that we have these cybersecurity things. And it's the same in all industry, whether it's critical infrastructure, power generation, or manufacturing, or smart buildings, right? And smart buildings came around for all those reasons. Do I need a maintenance man that runs up and down and changes the thermostat on every floor when somebody has a problem? Or do I want to be able to do it from a control center in one place and have one person be able to control hundreds of buildings, right?
Exactly. And that is spot on. I mean, it's all about convenience. And if you look at the history of control systems over the years, when they, people think that smart buildings are a new thing. And I know you know this, but I mean, the technology's been around since the early 70s. And so, but what happened was all of these manufacturers began making their little proprietary systems. So if I went out and bought System X, then I was stuck with System X from then on. But the end user started saying, "Look, I don't want to be hung up on this one system. I need to be able to intermingle my systems, and I want to make the systems talk to each other." So these open protocols like LawnWorks and BACnet came along, and it was a good thing. And it was a convenient thing because if I had, and I'm not picking on any one manufacturer, but if I had a Johnson Controls system and I wanted to add a Honeywell system, I could make them talk to each other via BACnet. Right. But the thing is in the IT world, everything is CIA, confidentiality, integrity, and availability. In our world, availability is number one. So confidentiality was never taken into account. So now you got all of these systems being connected together as highly available as possible. Then you have like the group I used to work with. We were a systems integrator, but we were also a service provider. And so we could not roll a truck if you gave us remote access. And if you gave me remote access, let me back up and say this. What usually happened was the building guys would say, "Look, we don't know. We either don't know how to do it, or let's don't bother IT."
Right.
So we would help set it up, and we would control that remote access. Yeah. And very quick story is like Billy Rios and Terry McCorkle years ago found Google War 7. And then they just did a little bit of hunting. And this is about the time I was getting to know these guys. And they told me, they said, hey, we went into this integrator, found a couple of their other sites, and we were able to get in them because they use the same username and password. I said, that's what we do.
Yep. Yeah, and all the way down to, passwords, the same service accounts that are built in, IP addresses and machine names. A lot of vendors are using, I could walk into a power plant today and probably log in, especially one that I used to work at because my account's probably still alive, right? hopefully not. Like, more than likely it's disconnected. But my point is that things don't change. Like those little things. Back in the day, I've said this story a couple of times, but I was doing a control system upgrade project at a power plant, and I was sitting at the table with the vendor, and the vendor was presenting the proposal, the quote. And they had basically two quotes because the plant manager asked for it. They had a secure solution, a secure control system, and then they actually called it this, an insecure control system, right?
Really?
And that was the two options. And really the only difference was Active Directory and having the ability to have different logons and lock things down, things like that. But, this wasn't all that terribly long ago, and we're talking about critical infrastructure, power generation. Like, you want your lights to turn on when you flip the switch. And there was actually an offer on the table for insecure option, right? Because it was X number of dollars cheaper. And we know how that is a problem in security and a problem in all things. Like, am I going to, what's the first thing that's going to fall off? It's going to be the thing that people see as optional. And to your point, right, is sometimes security is seen as optional until, I mentioned this story a minute ago. Not all things are cybersecurity either. And a lot of these connections are availability. So availability doesn't just mean that I'm stopping China from attacking us or
Right.
a hacker from breaking into the building and shutting down the elevators. We were just at Black Hat. Again, I was telling you the story before this. We were at Black Hat, and one of the guys that was with us in our marketing department, he got stuck in an elevator at one of the large hotels on the Strip. He pushed the button in the elevator. They basically kind of threw their hands up and said, yeah, I don't know. He ended up, luckily, having a cell phone, was able to call the fire department, but was stuck in the elevator for an hour. Now, am I implying it was a cybersecurity event? No. But you asked a really important question. Does it matter? All he cared is he was stuck in the elevator for an hour and not able to do anything.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like when I started my journey, I went down the heavy-handed approach at the beginning, trying to, we got to just, jump on these systems and get them all buttoned up and secured. But after a while, and listening to the people that are actually having to pay for it.
Sure.
And, the commercial world is where I come from. So at the end of the day, and especially now after COVID, they want to make sure that they have butts in the building, right?
Sure. Yep.
And so at the end of the day, like you said, does it matter what the event was? So my approach now is all about about resilience.
Yep.
And yes, cybersecurity is a component of that. But just like in the case of what you were talking about, that yells volumes to me that they had no plan or process if something happened.
Right.
Does it matter what it was? No.
Right.
But the people are like, I don't know.
It's pretty frustrating that you want to, you call customer service and you don't necessarily expect, the world, but you expect them to do something and to take some actions, some valuable, steps to try to at least pretend like they're trying to help you. Not just throw their hands in there and be like, I don't know, not my problem. Like, I don't know what to do about this. This is, outside of my wheelhouse. When you're stuck in an elevator, you want somebody to take some action.
Exactly. And, kind of along that lines about service, this is kind of a little bit of a change of direction, but it made me think of a couple of situations. Is when you do have somebody involved in your organization that is your knowledge keeper. Okay, he or she is the go-to person, right? That is a risk. And I got two stories that just, you can't make this stuff up. One was a large military base somewhere around here. And we were going to do an assessment. And myself and another guy, we were going to be down there for 2 weeks. And so when we got started, the very first day, they gave us this guy who supposedly knew all the systems at the base. And we'll just say his name's Bob. And so we met Bob, and they absolutely right. Every building we went into, every system we looked at. I mean, the guy had all this knowledge. The very next day we showed up and got to the little guard shack thing, called down to say, hey, we're here. Well, his boss answered the phone and said, Bob's not going to be here today because he was in an accident this morning. And I said, well, is he going to be back? And he said, well, he's okay. They won't get it checked out. But I'm sending you 2 other guys to help you. So these guys met us. We started going to these buildings again, and I kid you not, 80% of the time they said, well, you'll have to ask Bob when he gets back. That's one thing. Then there's the reliance of another, customer that had brought in like 150 buildings to one centralized location. And there's a particular manufacturer that requires a username and password and an IP address to allow the devices to talk to each other. Well, this guy was their go-to guy. I met him. He's smart, and they relied on him quite a bit. Well, they found out he was stealing, and he was stealing some pretty. Well, anyway, suffice it to say, once he was picked up and taken off, IT had learned just enough about how to remove users from the system. Well, they had scaled down their people so they could control everything from one central location. And I'll just say this was a medical organization. Is when they started taking this username out and password or the account out of the system, they started losing buildings.
Because it was using that account for a lot of administrative things. Yep.
Exactly. And they say, they called me up and they said, what do we do? And I said, well, you got to get that user back in there and reboot these systems. We can't do that. Why? And then they explained why. Yeah. And it was all in a legal thing. So they went back to the manufacturer, and I know the manufacturer and the CTO there well, so this is coming direct from the horse's mouth. It took 6,000 man-hours to get all of those buildings back up because they removed a username.
Yep.
And
yeah,
no process.
There's no process. And that goes back to, again, I'm sure in the beginning, that smart person, they're not always bad people. They're just doing the best they can. Like maybe they don't know how to create a service account, or maybe they've asked and the IT didn't enable it, or whatever the reason, or it was just faster, quicker. There's a lot of that you see, and you have an outage on a weekend, and it's Saturday night at 3:00 in the morning, and you're just trying to get it working. So what do? Anything you can. You run to Walmart, you grab a switch, anything that you can do to get it back, because availability is the most important, right? So exactly. I'm trying to fix and get these things working. But then Monday morning, when it comes back around, I got it through the weekend, I put the Band-Aid on. Monday morning comes around, most of the time, in my experience, I've seen, there's little, they don't want to go back and change it. Like, it's working, just leave it alone. Exactly. And so it sits there for a year, 2 years, 3 years, and those things happen, and they're like dominoes, and they happen over here, and there's a Band-Aid over there, and there's a Band-Aid over there. And then when you have an event like that person who left and his account needed to be disabled, well, now all those dominoes just fell. Like that, your house of cards just crumbled down because everything, there were so many little gotchas everywhere that you didn't know where they were because they weren't documented and you didn't have standard processes. And this gets back to, it's easy to talk about how different OT and IT are, right? I talk a lot about it on this podcast and how different it is and why you can't just do IT things in OT spaces. But on the flip side, they're also not that different. In that you need processes, you need to have standards, you need to, have visibility. You don't need to have one, lone, really smart person that just controls everything, because if that smart person gets hit by a bus or gets fired for whatever reason or any number of situations, you're in a bad place, and that's not a good place to be.
Well, I like what you said about IT and OT really aren't that much different.
Right. Now,
the biggest difference, and this is the one that is hard for people, it's hard for me to even convey, because when I do assessments And in my role at Michael Baker, that's what our group does, is we do risk assessments. And prior to coming here, that's my priority mission for the past 8 years, is assessing systems that I helped design and put in this shape. Is when you go in and you tell it something, these are the things we found. Well, if you've got somebody like a C-level that's just coming in and trying to fix the problem, their initial reaction is to kind of either do a couple of things. They either look at the guy and say, "What the heck have you been doing?" It's like
shame on you, right?
Shame. And I'm like, whoa. What you're dealing with is not technology just by itself. You're dealing with a culture.
Yeah.
And it's a culture that's 30, 40, 50 years old. And like you said, these guys are fixers. They're going to do whatever they can to make sure that the people in the building are comfortable, the lights are on, and this. That's the task they've been given, and it's been driven down to them that, hey, I don't care what's going on. Everybody in this building better be comfortable.
Right.
And so they take care of it.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So, and that kind of leads over. So I know you're on things like building cybersecurity and that organization with a bigger perspective of trying to set those policies and those bigger ideas of, as a real estate owner, if I buy a building or my company buys a building, I don't necessarily know about cybersecurity or the operational side of how the control systems work. I just bought a building. Like I'm a rich person. I wanted to go buy a building, and I don't know what any of that stuff means. So talk a little bit about how the work that you guys are doing are really specifically focused on helping that type of scenario, so that you have something to say, hey, this is what you should go do to protect your people and the building, tenants, et cetera.
So that's a good analogy you had. They just buy buildings, right? And I had a guy tell me this one time. He said, property groups buy and sell buildings like you and I buy and sell cars.
Right.
I mean, they buy a building with the intent of selling it and making a profit at some point.
Yeah.
So they don't know what they're getting into. They know all the traditional stuff. They can have, people come in and do the, test and balance on the systems. They can, check this, that, and the other, but they don't really know what's underneath the hood. So people are looking outside trying to find different things, different barometers, if you will, to determine, hey, is my building safe? Is it okay? What am I going to have to do to it? Well, the work that Building Cybersecurity has done is Lucian Niemeyer, who I've had the pleasure of being able to work with him now for close to 4 years. He tells the story, and he was on your podcast, and he probably told this story about how his boss looked at him in the face and said, "Fix it." Yeah. And he comes from the Office of the Secretary of Defense, and he was responsible for billions of square feet of buildings. Yeah. And so Lucian is a results getter. And so he called a bunch of people from the industry in and says, okay, guys, something's got to happen. So he was that catalyst that got the thing started. So a group of us came together and formed what was called the Breakfast Club. And the reason it was called the Breakfast Club was we literally met every morning, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, and some Friday mornings for 2 years from 7 to 8 a.m. And the first thing we did was sat down with the different standards trying to figure out, okay, what is the one that's going to be the easiest and the most applicable to what we're trying to do here.
Right.
And it was really great, the people that came together. One guy was Johan Nye, who is with ISA, and he's one of the co-chairmen of the working groups. There was a guy, Tony Sager, who is, Tony.
He's been on the podcast as well, yep.
All right, so Tony's on there, a guy named Steve Griffith from NEMA, and then we had a couple of NIST SMEs. One was Sebron Partridge, and the other gentleman, he wasn't with us too long. But anyway, we sat down and we literally, I kid you not, for almost 3 solid months, just picked apart the different ones. Yeah. And so at the end of the day, when we all agreed that for the OT side, we needed to use 62443, ISA 62443. And for the IT side, because the underlying infrastructure that supports it is IT,
Sure.
is we used CIS, or Center for Internet Security, because that's the derivative of the SANS Top 20, but it's, I like what they've done. So, but even through those filters, when I first started with these guys, I was like, I'm the dumbest one in the room. I mean, you got Johan Nye, he's got 30, 40 years, Exxon Mobil, head cyber guy, Tony Sager, I mean, NSA, and then here's Fred, who I'm just a dumb integrator. But I'll see, and I said, look, I don't know what I can do here, and they said, you're the building side.
Right.
Was the filter through which this stuff had to go through. But even that, I got to tell you, Aaron, is when we got done, we ended up with 62443, 2-1, 2-4, 3-2, and 3-3. And of course the CIS. But even that is overwhelming to a building owner who is just buying his buildings, trying to figure out what's going on. So we kept working, and even after we said, okay, these are applicable, but I kept saying, but guys, we're still in kindergarten. Yeah. You're giving them a senior level
calculus problem.
Right, and they're looking at it like, I don't know what 2 + 2 is.
Exactly.
So, and I don't mean that in a negative way, but I mean, IT started out the same way. ICS has started out the same way, and we're ICS is ahead of us, but we're not that far apart, and we can share some information that will help each other. But so what we did is we boiled it down to 16 primary areas, and if you go on buildingcybersecurity.org's website, you can see what those 16 primary areas are, and what I said was, we need to be realistic with these people. Yes, they could get a BCS assessment and get a bronze, silver, gold, but they need to ask themselves these questions first. Because if I can't answer these questions, that yes, I have governance program, yes, I have backups, so on and so forth. There's no point in going any further.
Sure.
So they got to start somewhere, right?
Well, and it gives them a measuring stick. So talk a little bit about what those, you talked about the certifications, bronze and silver and gold, all that kind of stuff. Like, what is that helping them do? I go buy a building, why do I want to have a bronze versus a silver versus a gold? Like, obviously there's a reason, but talk a little bit about why.
The why is is a question you have to answer. Well, the why of why you want a bronze, silver, and gold. The answer to that question is, what is the criticality of my building? Because if you're, and I'm throwing out generalizations here, but if you're a standard commercial real estate building with but office tenants who are leasing space to run their business, okay, well, you need bronze, because if you lose or dump part of your building, what's going to happen to the people that are in there? They're going to go home. Yep. Well, when we're in post-COVID, and I don't know how much the people that are listening know, but I mean, like commercial real estate leases and stuff, they can be for years and years, and they're not cheap. Yep. And so when COVID hit, a lot of these people started saying, look, I don't know when we're coming back, so we'll just pay whatever penalty we have to. We won't out of the building. Because they're looking at this long-term thing. That set a precedence. Yeah. So now what is, if something impacts them and they can't be in that space, they are going to go back to the owner of the building and say, we want a refund for these weeks or whatever. Yeah. So that's one thing. And they may not re-up their lease. Yeah. So you got that. Then the next level is... there may be some factors like you've got some mixed use space, you've got retail, You've got maybe storage of some type, where there's perishables and that kind of thing. And that's the silver. And then the gold is going to be things that involve national security and that kind of thing. Because we've got commercial real estate people that actually have 3-letter agencies in their building. So you got to determine that first. Well, the majority is going to be bronze.
Right.
If you get bronze, man, you're way above everybody else. It's going to be less and less the higher you go in commercial real estate, obviously. But that's what kind of helps you determine where you need to be.
Well, and it's a barrier to understand it, and all of this ties back to risk, right? All of this ties back to what is the risk to my business. So if I'm a commercial real estate owner and I have buildings all over the place, I'm trying to understand the risk to natural disasters and floods and theft and whatever those things are. And the control system, the automation, the building management, all of that stuff is part of that equation, right? It goes into that actuary table of knowing where my risks are. And we have to look at the control system and, the elevator controls and all of those systems as part of that equation. And again, it's not just, trying to stop a bad actor or a hacker from doing it. It's also, like we said before, that elevator, it needs to work, because if you stick your, if people don't trust that they can get in the elevator to get to their floor, they're going to not want to pay their rent. And they're going to want to find a building that is reliable, because if they have a client, imagine the scenario where your office is on the 50th floor, this really nice building, and and you have a CEO coming to visit you in your office, and he gets stranded in the elevator for 3 hours, right? He's not going to have a real favorable opinion of you, and even though you had nothing to do with it as a business owner renting space in that building, it's still going to be a bad experience for that person, and he's not going to want to come back to your office.
No, and that right there is, I also like to always temper everything with the psychology of a situation. So, for example, what you just said is perfect, because the guy, if this building gets a reputation of these elevators work about half the time, and you and I know perception is reality. Yep. That elevator may only hiccup twice, but then it gets, just like when you tell your fish story. You caught a fish this big, and then now it's this big. Well, when people start talking about things, there's always embellishments. And so reputational damage, keeping, it's like I go back to the resilience piece of this. If your systems are resilient, regardless of what the situation is, you're going to be much more successful of keeping people in your building.
So what are some of the more low-hanging fruit, or things as you're doing these assessments that you're seeing that people are missing, or maybe some easy things that they can do that you're seeing, again, from the experience that you've had doing these assessments, building these control systems as well, that can help them to get out and get started, right?
So I've got the 3 principles. Let me back up and say this. Building cybersecurity has done a lot to promote, getting our buildings safer, setting up processes and policies and standards for people to live by. The problem is people get overwhelmed.
Sure.
And so what I try to do is say, look, before you go down that road, do these 3 things. Do you know what you have? Do you know how it's connected? And do you know who has access? If you do those 3 things, and those are, I don't want to say they're easy or cheap.
They're foundational.
But they're foundational, and you're not going to have to buy a bunch of tools and hire a bunch of, outside help. You could do all of that inside your house. So don't be overwhelmed. And the thing is, once you've done those 3, now it's like anything else. Once you get started, it's easier to keep going. But when you're standing there looking at the mountain, it's like, oh my Lord, what am I going to do? But these 3 things are kind of like picking up stones and moving them out of the way. Okay, well, I'm getting started, but eventually you'll plow through that mountain.
Yeah, and it's so fun. Again, we talked about this earlier, but it doesn't matter what the industry is, building cybersecurity or manufacturing or critical infrastructure, whatever those things are. Those 3 things are the same across the board. what assets do I have? What are they? Where are they? Who has access to them? Like these are found. They're not sexy. They're not exciting. They're not gonna, they're not fun. They don't have fancy tools. Yes, there are tools that do it. We have a tool that does stuff around asset management and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But the point is that they're not sexy. They're not fun. Like they don't do any blinky light fancy stuff. You don't have AI and ML and doing all these buzzword things because it's just basic stuff. Like, you don't get to the NFL. Without having the foundations of basic blocking and tackling. You don't get to the Major League Baseball without being able to hit a curveball, right? It doesn't matter how many, I was watching the documentary the other day about all the steroid use, and it was across all, kind of sports, but it, kind of honed in on baseball. And I remember the Sammy Sosa and Mark McGwire and that home run thing, right? And the steroid use and all that kind of stuff. But, I was sitting there talking to my kids and my wife, and I'm like, all this is great, and yeah, they hit more home runs, but that didn't get them to the majors. And just taking steroids didn't make them hit 60-plus home runs. Like, I couldn't have taken steroids and hit 60 home runs in the major leagues against those pitchers. Like, there's just no way. They still had to do the work. Lance Armstrong, winning 7 Tour de France, right?
Yep.
Yes, it helped him. Maybe it gave an advantage. Everybody was doing it. That's not my point. But you still have to do these things.
You're right.
It's just basic stuff that you've got to understand, and then you can do the icing and add on those other things to get to those next levels.
And, great analogies with the, I think you and I may have watched the same baseball one, because I was watching that, and I was thinking that, it's like, you still got to hit a 102 mile an hour fastball. I mean, you got to have hand-eye coordination. Yep. You can't go out there like me.
Right.
I can't do it. But the thing about it is, it's also the realization that you have to be honest with yourself about those three things, because I've done, I don't know how many assessments in the U.S., Canada, and overseas, and I can tell you that 90% of the time, nobody knows everything they have on their network.
Right. Yep.
90% of the time. In fact, real quick story, I was in Australia, and I met the service provider, and I said, okay, we got to look at your network. And he's like, well, I only got 4 devices on here. And I said, they didn't pay me to fly this far to take your word. And I'm not trying to be rude. He said, no, that's no problem. So we plugged up, and there were 32 devices on that network.
Yep.
One of them was a Raspberry Pi, and everybody's like, what happened? It took them 2 weeks to find that Raspberry Pi, by the way. But the next thing is how it's connected. It's the Band-Aid over the years. Yep. I mean, it's like, I have this HVAC system. Oh, we brought in this lighting control system. Well, we can run its own network, but then we can stitch these together so the schedule from this one will, it just becomes this ball of wire.
Yep.
And then who has access? Yep. Well, you and I both know the company that I used to work for here in Atlanta, and I know they've made changes, but up until I started pushing them down the road of cybersecurity and saying, hey, whoa, you got to take a look at things, we had the same username and password in the systems from 1998 until 2012 when we started changing. Yeah. So that meant anybody that ever worked for us, and weren't there anymore, still had access.
And that's the way. Think about how many vendors are out there in the space. How many small companies? How many big companies? How many medium-sized companies? How many software packages? How many skids and control systems? All these different things. They all have those. So every one of them, if you think about it, there's no way everybody can be good at everything, right? They stay in their lane, but they don't. Nobody else. That's the difference. A good difference on the IT side is nobody expects the vendor to provide the security. And unfortunately, in OT, I look at the vendor for everything. They support the system. They're bringing it in. They're designing it. I don't need to understand it. I just look to the vendor as the expert. And unfortunately, those vendors, in my experience, don't understand this stuff. So they're doing something. They're faking, or not even faking. They're trying. But they're not experts, right? And they don't want you. Well, just take my word for it. And that's worked up until fairly recently of, you can't touch mine. This is a proprietary thing. You can't make changes. Just trust me, it's secure. And that's not what I see that trend finally changing, which I've been frustrated for 15 plus years around that. But it's got to change, because I'm not going to trust you. Like you said, they paid you a lot of money to go over there, and I appreciate you telling me that it's only 4 devices, but I have to look. Like, I just do. That's what they paid me for, right? I'm not going to trust you. Like, it's not because I don't like you. It's because that's my job, is to make sure. Trust but verify. One of my mentors just tell me that all the time. Trust but verify. Awesome. I like you as a person. Now I'm going to verify what you told me.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, in that, not to beat a dead horse, but that this is, straight out of my history, is I got a call from the service group, our customer service or whatever, that would send people out, our service group. And they called me because I was in charge of the programmers, and they said, we've got one and we're not really sure what to do with it. And I was like, okay, what is it? And they said, well, so-and-so called and said their control system was gone.
Gone?
I said, what do you mean it's gone? He said, that's what they told us. We don't know. We're not. And I said, okay. So I said, tell me who it is, and we'll get somebody out there. So I got one of the guys who was what I would call, he's a little bit older and a little bit more seasoned, and he was not the one that just ran in and started unplugging everything, So he walked in there and he asked the guy, he said, what do you mean your control system's gone? Show me. And the guy said, okay, come here. And he pointed at the screen. He said, see, it's gone. And so this guy, our guy, said, okay, I think I know what it is. He went to the recycle bin, and the guy had deleted the shortcut. Somehow it got deleted. Yeah. But this was not to say that guy was dumb. Yeah. It was just the way he knew how to get to his control system, and to him it was gone.
Right. Yeah. It was not there anymore, and he didn't understand. And I remember back in the day when we started doing virtualization in OT, and we had VMs and virtual machines and things like that, things that we've been doing in IT for years, right? But it was like magic in OT. It was voodoo. Like they're like, you can't do virtualization. Like that doesn't make sense. That's not reliable. I'm like, what do you mean? Like it's more reliable because I'm not dependent on hard. But it was because they couldn't grasp it. These are extremely smart people. They're very, very intelligent, like way smarter than me.
They're physical people.
Absolutely. Because they can't see it and touch it. They don't think it's real. And they can't understand how can a virtual, what do you mean? Where does it live? Well, it doesn't live anywhere. I can move it around. Wait, time out. What? No. That doesn't seem safe or secure or reliable. So we're just going to err on the side of, I don't understand it, so no. And that's also been a common theme in OT is, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Which is why we've band-aided all of these problems all these years, why passwords lived from 2000 to 2012 or whatever the dates were, because it worked. It was easiest. It was a surefire way to make sure any of your people showed up on site, they knew how to log in, right? But the second thing is if I don't understand it, the default answer is no. I'm not going to ask for understanding. If you can't make me understand it in a very short, 5-second window, elevator pitch, then I'm just going to kick it out the window because I don't feel comfortable. I don't trust you enough to trust that you know more than me. So because I don't understand it, no, just no.
No. Yeah, I mean that is a. I've heard one guy tell me one time. He said, "IT's answer is always no."
Yeah.
And I said, "So is yours."
Exactly.
And they were like, "Well," and I said, "No, because if in order for us to really fix this, the things that we have to do are going to be disruptive to your world. And your answer is no." And he said, "Well, that's different." And I get their point, because I used to be the one. I'd see somebody come in from outside and want to be messing with my system, that I had programmed in somebody else's building. And I was like, no. You're not touching this. You're going to mess something up. So, yeah, no, I mean, I get it, but that's what I was talking about that I don't hear enough people in cybersecurity, and I'm not knocking on any of
Sure.
people that do it, because you know as well as I do, we all got an uphill battle. Yeah. But I don't hear enough people that do what I do that say something about the culture and the feelings, or whatever you want to call it, that go along with this, because there is an entrenched method of doing things, and it's all here. It's the technology can be addressed, but if you don't address the people, they're going. A prison that I went and did an assessment on, I was looking up in the VFV, the PIUs, the boxes in the top. I was looking at some of them, and there was this stick on them. I was like, "What is this for?" And it said, "Well, when it's April, we close the hot water valves." So that's how you control your heating to your PIUs? Yep. Why? Because we don't trust the control system. So they would climb up every April or May, and shut the heating valves off. And then in like September or something, they'd open them back up. And so there was no control.
Right. Yeah.
I said, "You don't have a control system." "Yeah, we do."
Yeah. Another saying I like to say a lot, and one of my mentors told me this a long time ago, but all business is a people business. So, and that's the piece that we seem to forget a lot of the time, and it's OT against IT, and or it's Democrat versus Republican, whatever the scenario is. We too much focus on trying to be right or proving the other person wrong instead of listening for understanding. Not that you're going to necessarily change your mind or change your opinion, but if we go into these conversations and the deeply technical, I've been in rooms where people, including myself, are screaming because I'm trying to get my point across, or they're trying to get their point across, and then we all leave just frustrated because nobody got their point across.
Answer.
And the more that I scream, or the more aggravated I get, the more aggravated the other person gets, and they're not listening to me, and I'm not listening to them, and we're just we're using a bunch of energy and not going anywhere. We're just spinning around in circles, right? When we're able to disconnect, it's the same thing with conversations with my kid or with my wife, right? When I'm able, sometimes you just got to take a step apart and then come back together with a calmed, hey, we're trying to get to this outcome. What is the desired outcome? How do we get there that makes you feel comfortable, that makes me feel comfortable? Because we can't just say no. Like the days of just saying no and giving them the Heisman, it can't happen anymore. Like we've got to come up with a way. And it's going to be a compromise. That's the way that our society is supposed to be. It's supposed to be a compromise. Like it's not all right, it's not all left, it's not all up, it's not all down. It's somewhere in the middle where we just kind of navigate through to find a way. And every implementation is different. Every building is different. Everybody looks at the building cybersecurity framework, and they're going to implement it a little bit differently because they want to focus on things. They want to be bronze, or they want to be silver. They want to be gold for whatever those reasons, like we talked about earlier. But they're all different, and that doesn't make one necessarily better than the other. It's all about risk. It's all about trying to provide availability for these environments and for my assets, right?
Well, I'm glad you said that about, it's their interpretation, because, and I'm not going to mention their names, but I've been fortunate to sit in the room with some people that are with these different, quote, bodies,
sure.
NIST, ISA, ISO, list. And it was really kind of refreshing. It was like we were in a little safe environment, and every one of them said something that I always in the back of my mind kind of figured this was the case, but they all said these are suggestions.
Right.
These are not the law of God.
They're not mandates. They're not regulations.
No.
They're suggestions. They're ideas. They're frameworks. They're guides. They're maps.
Yeah.
But you can, just because there's a map that when you pull up Waze on your GPS or Google,
you can go three different ways.
There's three different ways, and they all get you there, right? And you have different reasons.
Right.
Maybe you want to go there really fast, so you take the toll road. Maybe you want to save money, so you avoid the toll road. Maybe you want to take the scenic route because you like the view. Like. That doesn't make one right and one wrong. They all do they get you to the destination? And what are your requirements along that, right? And it's so funny. Like you can fight all day long about what technologies to implement or what, how to do it, all those kind of things. But at the end of the day, we should continue to focus on the destination. Where am I trying to get to? And maybe you and I have a different interpretation of how to get there. But if both of our answers will get us there, then we shouldn't fight over it. Like, yeah, maybe I think I'm right or my way's better, but okay, let's flip a coin and move on and solve the next thing that gets us again towards assuming that we can, unless we're saying I believe that your way we won't get there. We'll go to the wrong place or it hurts us. Unless that's the case, if it's just, I like fish and you like chicken, do they both feed me? And am I full after the fact? Okay, now let's move on. Like, it's fine. I don't have an allergy against fish. Let's just move on.
I like something. You just triggered a thought in my head to even maybe show another analogy of this. It's like, and this, I've been trying to figure out a way to tell people, hey, don't, you're not going to hit gold tomorrow. Right. You could cyber secure yourself out of business. Be real. Is if you were going to drive from New York to Los Angeles, are you going to do that in one continuous trip? And if you and I are both headed from New York to Los Angeles, you may go to this spot and stop.
Right.
And I may go to this spot and stop. The point is, you can't do all of this in one sitting. Right. You have to do it in stages. Just like if you want to drive across country, you have to do it in stages. You got to get gas, you got to eat, you got to go to the bathroom, you got to rest. I mean,
How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time.
Exactly.
Awesome. So my final question for you is the big ominous question, right? Of in the next 5 to 10 years, what's maybe one thing that you see that you're excited about coming up on the horizon in cybersecurity, and maybe one thing that's concerning that's coming up on that you see that hey, we need to take some action on, or it could be scary.
The thing I'm excited about is in the period of time that I've been doing this, I remember when I first started, people were saying, Fred, you're pushing rope up a hill. Nobody cares if the lights get turned off. Right. But I've actually seen in the past couple of years this. It is an awareness. It's people are saying, hey, I need to take a look at this, and they're being proactive. So that's an exciting thing to me, and I feel like in the next few years, it's going to get better. New buildings are being built, and they're actually designing into the systems. I mean, it's just as cheap to design it in as if you're just designing it anyway. Right. So that's good. The things that worry me is I don't want to sound like everybody else, but I do know, and you can look this up, is when ChatGPT was released in November, in December, somebody on the dark web posted code that they had spoken into existence. Now, it didn't work, but another guy on the dark web looked at it and was able to make a few modifications and turned it into a working malware. Now you have Worm GPT, which, Chat has all the supposedly the checks, although I have figured out, I'm sorry to say this, but I think evil thoughts, I do good. Sure. That's what, that's what I do. So I'm like, can I trip up ChatGPT? Well, I figured out a way to trip it up, and it told me how to build a bomb. Okay. Now you got Worm GPT, which is specifically designed not to have those constraints. And you now have people that don't know anything about programming and the disciplines behind it that could say, write me a JSON for blah, 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 whatever. Or, so I don't know where this is going, but people have asked me, how do you go to sleep at night? I used to say, I go to sleep. I mean, I don't worry about things all night long, about what I've seen, because it is what it is. But with this one, there's a lot of unknowns, and I just don't know what that means. And, the Department of Homeland Security coined a term called killware, which, it means what it says, or it could be property damage. Well, with tools exponentially increasing, I used to feel like, you have to have specific control knowledge to know how to really tear something up.
Security
you
by
don't
obscurity.
have to anymore. Yeah. Those days are, I think, gone.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
that bothers me.
It's truly, that answer's very common now. A lot of my guests are saying the same thing from different perspectives, but it's true, right? It's on the flip side, it can be used for good. We can use it to be, to strengthen our cybersecurity policy and to strengthen. And how can, that's the thing. And it goes back to, you can't say no anymore. We've got to start thinking the way, because the bad guys are going to use it. They're going to. Nation states are going to use it, and 13-year-old kids that are just bored in their basement, they're going to use it, right? They're not all just hackers. I think back to that, the war games of Matthew Broderick. I talked about this yesterday on the podcast as well. But it's not always bad people. It's just somebody having fun, and they're not necessarily sure what they're doing. And they don't all. And again, a 13-year-old kid may not understand the implications of the things that they're doing. They're just having fun, right? In their mind, they're playing a video game. And so we've got to think things differently, and we can't just say no. We can't expect security by obscurity. We can't expect that our vendors are going to do these things for us. We've got to take more steps. So that's why I love the fact that you are working with all these different organizations from ISA to, building cybersecurity. We've got to start building easy ways for people to understand and digest, so that they can take actions and take actionable. Again, the first three things you talked about, they're not sexy. They're not fun. They're not exciting. They're not a Tesla, plaid driving, self-driving across the country. It's a 1972 Yugo, right? But it gets you from point A to point B, and that's the point.
Exactly.
Right? It start there, and then you upgrade it, and then you get the Toyota Corolla, and then you get the Lexus, and then then you move on up the chain. But you don't start out driving the sexiness, right? That's not where it begins, and that's okay.
No.
Everybody starts there, right? It's part of the journey. Awesome.
Exactly.
Well, Fred, hey, want to give you an opportunity. Is there anything you want people to know, how to get in touch with you, et cetera, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you can find me on LinkedIn, Fred Gordy. As far as I know, I'm the only one that I've seen. But you can reach out to me. I'm always happy to connect with people. And also, too, is I'm being here at Michael Baker. It's been a great opportunity because they have given me the opportunity to be available. If somebody just wants to talk and just get some general concepts, reach out to me. I'm happy to jump on a call with you, whatever. It's not all about the money. I believe this is my mission. So I just want to help.
And that's why.
So that's
why I have
way.
people like you on this podcast, because that's my thought as well. Like, I do this, I enjoy doing this, but I enjoy having conversations because, like we said in the beginning, like, I'm passionate about this. It's important. The work we're doing is important. There's a lot of work that needs to be done to protect these environments so that my kids have a safe place to live. They can go to buildings and turn their electricity on, and their cars work, and it's not anarchy in the streets and all the things that we're trying to protect against. So thank you for that. Thank you for the fight that you're doing and focusing on building cybersecurity, and all of these things matter. OT is everywhere, and we've got to do things in all these different spaces to protect the world that we live in.
Well, thank you, Aaron, and thank you for what you're
Awesome.
doing as well.
Thank you, sir. I'm sure we'll meet in person.
Thank you.
At some point.
Yes, sir.
Thanks for listening to the Protect OT Cybersecurity Podcast. If you got some valuable information from today's show, please subscribe, rate, and review the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. To learn more about Aaron and to get your free copy of the OT Cybersecurity Solution Buyer's Guide, go to industrialdefender.com. That's industrialdefender.com, or you can click the link in the show notes.